and others. Here to talk about digital identity is not just facial recognition, and CLEAR is not just that kiosk at the airport anymore. We've got Kim and Kazra from CLEAR to discuss the future of digital identity. So if you'll both please come up.
So good afternoon, and welcome to our lightning round this Columbus Day and Indigenous People Day. While we only have 20 minutes, I promise you that it will be packed with insights and valuable information. My name is Kimberly Walton. Some of you may recognize me as the former Executive Assistant Administrator for Enterprise Support at the Transportation Security Administration. I now wear the hat of CEO for Diverse USA. Today, in this session titled Digital Identity Security and Innovations, we have the privilege to be joined by Kazra Mashkani. Kazra is the Executive Vice President of Operations for CLEAR, with a proven track record in spearheading aviation operations for over 2 years. He recently transitioned to steer the platform business, CLEAR Verified. He's also responsible for travel innovation and partnerships. His wealth of experience makes him the ideal person to shed light on this topic. I have a few curated questions to kick off our discussion. Following that, I hope to open the floor to the audience for any questions from the audience. So please take advantage of this opportunity to glean insights from an industry expert. So to my first question, Kazra, you and I talked a little bit about how technology can enhance checkpoint security, but obviously any security system is only going to rely on people to operate and people to manage. I know firsthand how important it is to think about not only the technology, but how it will operate in the real world and how you can use it to mitigate the risk of human error. So can you give a sense of how you have thought about this in your time that you've been at CLEAR?
Absolutely. And thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Excited to be here for this lightning round. So to kick off on your question, Kimberly, for those of you who may not know, CLEAR was really born out of the post 9/11 world. It was the thesis that technology, and specifically biometrics, could be a tool to not just make the world safer, but also more frictionless for travelers. And the idea that technology could take some of the human-centric processes and make them much more process and tech-oriented. We partner very closely with TSA, and our partners at TSA have a very difficult job, right? Every day, over 2 million people go through the checkpoints, and TSA validates identities, they screen, and it's hard. When we think about our TSA partners, it's a workforce that's been understaffed, underpaid for a long time, and Administrator Pekoski has made it one of his top priorities to make sure that pay gap is closed, and we were excited to see that development over the summer. Now, when you think about repetitive processes, over half of the errors that happen in repetitive processes as a result of human error come down to a couple key things. One is stress, one is the repetition itself, one is fatigue, and workforce environment. Those 4 things that I just described explain and describe the airport screening environment, right? It is high stress for the traveler and the employee. It is repetitious, happens to the tune of 1 million times a day, and it's fatigue-inducing. And so when we think about the origins of CLEAR, it was really how do we leverage technology to really augment the human and make as much of that process technology-centric as possible. And so 13 years ago, we were the first to bring biometrics to the checkpoint. We brought document authentication capabilities to the checkpoint such that it wasn't an individual assessing the authenticity of a doc. And of course, we use facial recognition technology, which the TSA also is rolling out to determine that the individual whose picture is on the document is actually the individual that's standing in front of you. And so, at one moment, all of those processes were up to the judgment of an individual. And so, both from the genesis and ongoing, we've thought a lot about how do you bring technology to get rid of and really isolate any room for human error. Of course, we have a ton of trust in our people and in our team, but our philosophy is the more you can reduce that room for human error, the better for everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. So my second question is, I'm curious on how you're thinking about continuing to innovate in digital identity. As our systems get better, of course, our adversaries get better, and they grow more sophisticated as well. So what are the kinds of steps you're looking to take in the future, continuing to stay one step ahead of potential bad actors and those who would do us harm?
Look, and the prior panel was a perfect tee up for this, so really enjoyed the content there. Look, we all know that CBP and other agencies find thousands of counterfeit documents, IDs, passports every year. The reality is as technology gets better, yes, we get more sophisticated in spotting and identifying counterfeits, but so do the bad actors, right? And so a couple of things that I'll mention here. One is data, and again, the panel prior to us hit on a number of these. From a data perspective, there is so much data out there on most of us that is just available on the internet, right? And so when you think about an MGM or a Caesar scenario where it wasn't the technology that failed, it was someone using that data to their advantage to social engineer their way into a tech ecosystem and do bad, right? Data is increasingly being used by AI. Again, the panel hit on this prior, but it is relatively easy to use AI to create an image that looks very, very realistic, right? You combine that with machine learning, which trains itself to get smarter, and you have technology that not only can create a synthetic identity, but actually can do so with depth as well. And so, we're all familiar with the knowledge-based assessments that ask questions that one should only be able to answer if you've lived through a certain experience. But with all that out there, with the combination of AI and machine learning technology, it's not all that surprising to see technology sort of, having that same knowledge or creating synthetic and deep identities that make that approach more challenging. So you take all of that, you take the fact, again, the panel right before this was a great tee up, technology changes fast, right? And as protectors of security, it is our job to stay ahead of that. One of the ways that we think about staying ahead of it is source corroboration. Source corroboration means for any piece of information, any document, going to the source, going to the actual source of truth. That can be done via cryptographic passkeys. That can be done via database confirmations. By going to that source and determining that, yes, this document that I'm looking at is not only being used for identity verification, but is in fact authentic and was issued by this issuing authority. This hasn't really been brought to our airport security checkpoints in scale, and so we're excited to do that. The prior panel also touched on multi-factor authentication. We often think of that as two-factor authentication. So often it's a password followed by a code. We're actually bringing four-factor authentication to the checkpoint. And we're partnered very closely as part of our public-private partnership with TSA in transmitting that four-factor authentication to the CAT machine, and with the goal of bringing the most secure, the most friction-free experience to travelers, 2.5 million travelers who go through checkpoints every day.
So, two-part question. So,
yes.
Get a little bit more in detail about the four-factor authentication, and then really talk a little bit about how you're going to get all of this done with the projected increase in the number of travelers.
Sure.
I've heard numbers that, we're quickly approaching 3 million and 4 million a day.
Look, the numbers are staggering. To answer the first part of your question, again, we often think of the world in terms of two-factor authentication, a password followed by a code that's sent to your phone or your email. When I say four-factor authentication at the security checkpoint, it is that one-time password. It is the source corroboration of the document. It is the facial recognition, as well as the boarding pass match. So all of those factors in concert with each other to achieve the goal of having the highest fidelity, knowing the most amount of information possible about the individual going through the security checkpoint.
Okay, thanks.
To answer your question with regard to growth, look, growth projections, when you look at it, when you sort of extrapolate what we've seen over the last couple of years are pretty staggering. And the reality is, in order to meet that projection, you're going to need a ton of innovation. And when we think about that sort of innovation, TSA PreCheck, I think, is a really great example where you take a subset of your population, you vet them in advance to a certain degree, and that frees up your resources, your people, to spend their time on the individuals that you know less about or don't know anything about, or the individuals who may be higher risk going through a security checkpoint. And so, you take that. I was actually at the ACI Airports Conference earlier this week and chatting with a number of airport directors, and we were talking about the to your point, Kimberly, by 2030, there are projected to be more than 1 million additional people going through national security checkpoints every single day.
Wow.
1 million more. And airport directors are thinking about infrastructure. Yes, some of them can build out. They're building up, they're building down in every direction they can find. And that's part of the answer. But the reality is infrastructure can't be all of the answer. And that's where innovation, I think, really comes in. And that can mean e-gates, that can mean faster passenger screening, that can be better baggage screening. Our view is that secure identity is going to be a key piece of that. So how do you design your identity systems so that you're gathering the highest fidelity information on people that are going through the nation's security systems, while maintaining data privacy, while maintaining data security? That is really the only way that it can be done. And I think it's up to our government partners, everyone in this room, to think about and think differently, frankly, about innovation that can absorb 1 million more by 2030.
It's a lot of extra people.
Yeah. Scary.
So in my introduction, I mentioned that you recently took over responsibilities for the non-aviation side of Clear's business. So can you walk us through what that looks like, what you're doing, and how what you learned on the airport side informs what you're doing now?
Look, I'm a few months into this new role, looking after our business outside of the aviation space, and I have the privilege of having worked in the aviation space, and so having seen that history, having seen some of the best practices, some of the lessons that we've learned as a company for 13 years, the thesis in the airports applies in many parts of our life. The notion that technology and secure identity can create not just safer experiences, but also better experiences, better customer experiences in a world where consumers are expecting more and everything is on demand and everything is just a button on your phone away. So I'll give you a couple examples of some of the places that we're playing in, some of the spaces that we're playing in, and some of the things that we're thinking about there. So I'll start with healthcare. Healthcare identity is just foundational to that entire experience. Health institutions in the US spend over $1 trillion every single year doing patient check-in, taking pictures, reconciliation of demographics, doing password resets for people who forget their passwords on their IT infrastructure. You combine that with the fact that there have been data breaches in the past years, right? And so the information that's available online and in other places means that there's a ton of fraud, whether it's Medicaid, Medicare, insurance fraud. So a ton of opportunity there. You take the social networks. There's a massive bot and misinformation problem. I'll use LinkedIn as an example, which is a partner of ours. So in their community report last year, they shared that they either prevented or removed 80 million fake profiles last year from their platform. And so these are actors who may have malicious intent. They may be domestic, they may be foreign. And the reality is that people are posting information about their career history, lots of personal information that then is used for social engineering, like instances of MGM or Caesars, which reportedly paid $13 million in the recent attack. And the last one that I'll highlight is KYC, or Know Your Customer, in the financial services space. KYC is a regulatory framework that all financial institutions have to follow. But again, there with deep fakes, with a lot of the proliferation of technology that we've talked about today, you can imagine a lot of people using information to scam, to money launder, and to generally do things that are malicious. And so, again, we're taking all of the things we've learned in the aviation space at the security checkpoint and applying those same lessons and that track record in a bunch of other places.
Wonderful. I know that our time is ticking down, so I wanted to give an opportunity to the audience that might have questions for Kazra. And I see Mike is coming around. Questions on identity? Yeah, there's a question right back there. All right. Perfect.
Hi there, I'm Juan Zarate from the Homeland Security Experts Group. Phenomenal lightning round, thank you. Are there any limits to validation? Is with AI and with massive amounts of data and the exponential use of new technologies, is validation potentially overwhelmed? And so how are you thinking about models of validation in the context of everything that you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think about it along a number of angles. One is, I talked a little bit about the notion of 1 million more people coming through security checkpoints every single day. And, obviously we have to absorb that demand and deliver for that audience without sacrificing anything from a security perspective. And in fact, ideally taking fidelity higher. So that's one aspect of it, is how in the context of much, much higher demand, you continue to maintain the same fidelity of identity. And then the other ways that I think about it are a couple-fold. I mean, there's no better source of truth than going to the source of truth, which is the issuing identity, and having that process be seamless. Again, you can do that with passports, you can do that with mobile driver's licenses, you can do that with many of the physical driver's licenses. Go to the source. We think that is sort of the next frontier. It's hard to crack that. And then just the multi-factor piece. So how do you use various data points, and we have to adapt as technology adapts as well, but how to use various data points at the same time quickly so that you're not sort of overwhelming the customer experience, the traveler experience, but are getting that highest level of fidelity.
Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Other questions from the audience? Go ahead.
All right, good afternoon. So I really just wanted to ask a question about how you're actually protecting the digital identities outside of your encryption or your processes. But I am challenged about my identity being stored somewhere. Of course, chain of custody of how this is passed along, or if it is. So if you could just speak to that.
Yeah, look, I think there's sort of two pieces to the question, and I appreciate the question. So one is, how do you store it, and sort of all the bells and whistles there. So as a company, we've invested quite a bit there. Security is job number one and has been since day one. Maybe the more interesting part of the answer, though, is how do you use that information? And as a company, we've taken the stance of we will never rent, sell, or share your information. The only exception is when you're trying to unlock an experience via Clear, say, you're verifying your identity on LinkedIn. And there we very much take the approach of it is, we're opt-in, right? And you always give consent. So you can imagine, you go to get I'll use an example, you go to get a drink at a bar, you hand over your ID, your driver's license. That driver's license has a ton of information on it, right? It has your home address, it has your age, it has your, your height, your weight, et cetera. All that's really needed in that instance is to know that you're over 21 in order to get your drink, right? And so that is part of how we also think, which is you only share the amount of information that's actually necessary for the transaction or the verification that you're about to undergo, and again, only with your consent.
Great. So it was a lightning round. We are at the end. So first, let me thank you, Kazra, for your insight. Thank the audience for their thought-provoking questions. And I just leave you with one thing. As a former TSA executive, always in my heart, I think while we remain on the cusp of exponential growth through technology innovations and passenger growth, we must not, under any circumstances, compromise our security standards. Growth is essential, but not at the expense of our security fabric. Thank you again.
Thank you, Maria.